funeral finally took place, and it also is on the front page of the Daily Nation. I'm not scared of anybody, says Cohen's widow. But of course, that is something that we continue to keep our eyes on, as the case has not been closed and continues. So that is that. Moving on, still on murders, page 3 is a rather disturbing story of 2 women who are found murdered in their house in South B. And according to what the initial investigations are showing, there was evidence of strangulation and force that was used. But of course, again, a very mysterious death, given that there seems to have been no motive. It is not suspected to be a break-in, because nobody broke into the house and nothing was stolen from them. However, 2 dead bodies found 2 days, suspected 2 days after the murder.
Yeah, Mike, this is another sad story that we're waking up to, and it's very sad that in this country people just walk into other people's houses and, and commit crimes, then they walk away. I think as a country, we must really consider the issue of our security and put in measures to ensure that wherever we are safe, because this is one of the unsolved murders, and the 2 ladies who are found murdered in their house. I think the police or the investigative agencies should tell Kenyans what really happened, because you can't just, if the doors were closed, how did these people enter into those houses? And if the door was open, then forensic analysis should actually come out with the fingerprints to establish who committed this murder. And I've read that they were dropped by a driver, and there was a vehicle, which was seen at around 2:30 a.m. I think the driver might want to explain himself away, but he must be placed at the center of this murder, because when you drop people, you ensure that as they go to the house, the doors are closed. So we don't know if it was a taxi driver or if it was a relative.
It's yet to be established.
Yeah, it's yet to be established.
Well, we'll wait and see what the investigators are going to find. But of course, even using our own logic, most estates, as you go in, you record the registration number of the vehicle. So let's hope that was taken. Sometimes they do take the ID number and telephone number of the driver. But of course, if the driver, if at all, he is a suspect or knew of anything, then he may have omitted those details.
Then another thing that is quite worrying, Mike. We always do these security budgets every year, but the issue of forensic laboratory always escapes, and people have been talking about this issue, and it's very unfortunate that Kenya as a country, at this level, at this age in time, we don't have a serious forensic lab that can determine some
minor
of these things,
like fingerprints.
Yeah, we depend on the basics, interviews, and at the end of the day, we end up having very wrong people in our prisons. You go to these prisons, you find people who have been accused and committed innocently. So I think it's high time as a country we put more resources in establishing a forensic laboratory where we can be able to nail down some of these culprits.
Absolutely, and that reminds me of the big campaign that was done by Jubilee government, and this was to ensure that we have cameras all over the place. And the keynote was Uncle Sam is watching, Big Brother is watching.
Big Brother is
so even in a case,
nowadays are
absolutely. So in a case like this, even if the security guard did not record the registration number of the car, surely it should be able to zero in and say that at this time there was a vehicle that passed at this place. And anyway, it's known to be a black SUV. But let's wait for the investigative
let's wait. But this might be one of those unresolved murders. We have Msando's murder has not been resolved to date. We have Juma's murders.
We have the likes of the lady that was killed in Kisumu.
So we have so many unresolved murders that, as a country, we feel so pained, because the relatives and friends are still waiting to see who really committed these murders.
Absolutely. And for them to be brought to book.
For them to be brought to book.
Talking about bringing to book, let's look at two stories. I'm going to combine two stories here. And one is found in the Daily Nation, and that's the headline of the Daily Nation: Killer School Owner Still Walking Free. And this, of course, is to do with the Precious Talent Academy, where we lost seven pupils not too long ago. That was on Monday morning. It was a rude awakening on Monday morning. Killer School Owner Still Walking Free. And that's what's making headline on the Daily Nation. But I'm combining it with a story that is on page 6 of the Standard, where pupils at risk as schools now disaster waiting to happen. Again, looking at the authorities doing their work and ensuring that our children are in a safe environment. But let's start with the fact that this particular owner of the school is still walking scot-free. But then again, there are questions, even if he's to be charged, what is he being charged with?
Mike, the problem in this country is that everybody tries to explain himself away. Nobody wants to accept responsibility, and everybody tries to apportion responsibility to another, institution or another person.
The blame game.
The blame game continues. When you look at this incident, a matter of negligence, on the part of the law enforcers, the duty bearers, and on the part of the school administration. Because when the authorities that authorized the construction of such structure and even gave the approval, because once the structure is completed, you are given a letter of occupation. So I'm just wondering if they came, inspected, and gave this school a letter for that kind of structure to be used by pupils, which is also very important that investigative agencies should be looking at. Yesterday I heard that they went to the city hall to investigate, to find out who approved, those who are responsible. And we just hope that this should be a lesson to those with the same behaviors of corruption.
And talking about a lesson, we now look at page 6, pupils at risk as schools now disasters waiting to happen. And not just disasters because of the structure, but there's a picture right there on page 6 of the Standard. And as you can see on your screens now, those are pit latrines, but even the condition of those pit latrines, we know that areas where there is waste becomes extremely septic. Yeah. And as a result, you can imagine what risks the children are going through to be exposed to that for their better part of being in school. Yeah,
most of the structures we are seeing here are in bad condition. But this is a situation or a scenario in most rural schools, and especially those schools in rural and semi-urban areas, like in slums. You walk into those schools, you find very, bad constructed structures or dilapidated latrines and so on. And it's very unfortunate that the free primary education did not consider or factor in the construction of structures.
Other facilities, yes.
The facilities, and this is left on the part of the parents who contribute some small money, schools holding fundraising, and in some cases, these schools do not have enough resources to put up modern structures. So if the free primary education was really free, and the influx of pupils in some of these schools and students in some of these schools, be it primary or high school, then we expected that maybe the government will consider putting in a budget for construction. Of putting up of facilities that are of modern stature. But when you move around all over the country, in rural areas and in slums, these are the scenes and the pictures you are likely to find out.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's very unfortunate, and get yourself a copy of the Standard and just look at that. But the other thing that I was mentioning earlier is the responsibility of the parents as well, because we drop our children to these schools. So let's be extra vigilant in ensuring that if we see anything that is questionable, we should not just sit back and hope for the best, only to receive calls like those who did.
Parents can question, but most schools administration will, just ignore and saying that, they don't have money, maybe pupils' parents have not paid. As I've said earlier, the schools or the government has not factored in the issue of constructing or putting up infrastructure. So if the school does not have money, do you expect that, things will work on their own? So as much as we might want to blame parents, but at some point, I portion blame on the government.
On the government.
Especially on the inspectoral department, and also the county governments also need to come in, because when you look at most schools, especially those manned by county, which is kindergartens, you find that pupils still learn under a tree in most of these counties, and these counties are receiving huge amount of money. Why can they put up structures that will enable good environment for learners instead of...
And there's no doubt, Mr. Akoli, that the responsibility and the buck stops with the government, but that does not mean the parents should not be extra vigilant to a point where they question, and if need be, even withdraw your children from the school.
From that school.
Because looking at this case in point, it is a matter of life and death.
Yeah, it's a matter of life and death, and you have talked about with the drawing. But if we give the example of Precious Top School Academy, you know, they are saying in a radius of around 5 kilometers, there's only that school, which is a private school. So even if you withdraw your child from that school,
what do you do with the child?
Where do you take this child?
And again, you might even be arrested for not taking your child to school.
You see.
Which is against the law.
Also, government should come in and maybe put schools within the radius where parents can take they can take their children, but still the inspectorate department of schools must do their work and must be held responsible.
All right, let's look at other stories. Page 10 is an interesting one. Martins politics and the IEBC comes into focus here. Ruto gets early win in race to reshape troubled poll agency, and this is something that was taking place in Parliament yesterday. Of course, the IEBC has been spotlighted many times, but it looks like we are still kind of waiting till the last minute for us to actually do something about it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that restructuring IBC is very important as we move towards 2022 elections. But again, it's very unfortunate that at the time when we are trying to restructure this institution, this key institution, we try to, associate any process with the leading contestants. You know, when we now talk about Ruto allies or Ruto carrying the day, at the end of the day, we are concluding that the IBC that is going to be formed, or the IBC that is going to be restructured is friendly to Deputy President, is Ruto. So does it inspire confidence in other contestants? So as much as we want to restructure and put in measures and mechanisms to have a strong institution in the name of IBC, let us try to be impartial. Let's try to find a middle ground where we feel inspired and feel confident that the institution that we're creating is going to serve all Kenyans regardless of their political affiliation. Because now it has set a center stage for conflict. And at the end of the day, those who are not happy with the way it's established will say, okay, when election comes, it will obviously be rigged. I saw the other people making statements that Jubilee equals to IBC. Why do such statements come up? Because of the lack of confidence and previous experience. So we need to have confidence in our institution because it's independent. Why do we put independent when in our own feeling we think it's not independent? So I think the headline could have been made better. A
bit better. Yeah. And of course, one of the things that that is trying to resolve is electoral malpractice.
Yeah.
But we as a country are still struggling and grappling to find what really our issue is, what ails Kenya. And that brings me to a story on page 13, where we have two major crafters of the current Constitution 2010, and that is Abdul Kadir Mohammed and the former chair of the Constitutional Review Committee, Yashpal Gai, advising and recommending that we should not change the law. In other words, the constitution that we have so far seems to be adequate, seems to be good, and until we have used it to its best, then we should not be clamoring to change the constitution. Your thoughts on this?
I really, and that has been my standpoint. I feel that the current constitution has not been utilized properly, has not been implemented. And if, as a country, we go on having these tests every time we do experiments, experiments with what is already there, then we miss the point. I just feel that the current constitution needs to be implemented. Kenya is not short of laws, policies, and regulations. What is lacking is goodwill to implement. And if we have a political goodwill to implement some of these recommendations in the constitution and to the latter, then I don't see why we need a review or amendment to the current constitution.
To the current constitution.
Because even if we do 100 amendments, Mike, I don't see a scenario where this constitution will solve each and every person's interests or problems. The current constitution that we have has been done as one of the progressive constitutions in Africa or maybe in the world because of the human rights aspect. But at the end of the day, we are looking at how we are going to share this power, how this power will go to this region. But I ask myself, even if we create these positions that people are talking about, the parliamentary versus, presidential systems, at the end of the day, we have these political parties. And in our country, political parties are divided along ethnic and regional lines.
And individuals.
And individuals, the personality syndrome issue. So even if we say, okay, we are going to form a parliamentary system where a prime minister is elected by parliament and, becomes the head of government, then we have a president who is the head of state. How are we going to solve the divisions within our political parties? Because you can't tell me that I run a campaign, I become a president, then become a ceremonial president, and my opponent comes in as a executive prime minister, who is going to implement the policies and the promises in my system that
and I think majority of the things that we ail from as a country are covered in our current constitution. However, the implementation is what is the problem. The enforcement is the problem.
The political goodwill.
Absolutely, the political goodwill. And this, the media is blamed a lot for not informing people and possibly just repeating what politicians have to say. So this is a good article for you to read, page 13 of the Standard. Don't change law, experts say. So see what the experts have to say, because at the end of the day, the Constitution does give every Kenyan the right and the power is in the... So whether we're going to change the law, whether we're going to change the law or not is really dependent on the people. But there you go, there's an article, don't change the law. That's according to Abdul Kadir Mohammed and Yash Palgai.
On the same note, yesterday we had Professor Anyang launching his book, dubbed Presidential, Parliamentary or Presidential, The Way for Kenya. I saw most of the people who are there are people aligned to the opposition, who are aligned to Prime Minister, because former Prime Minister was the guest speaker, and most MPs aligned to him were the only people I saw in that gallery. So is it that any discussion, be it intellectual or political, must it be like, if you are there, I'm not going to be there? This could have been a good discourse where people come in from all political divide and just try to interrogate. I hope the book will be available for everybody to read and interrogate, see what works for Kenya. So that as we move forward, we start now this conversation dialogue on what could be functional in our case.
All right, and just before we finish off with the Standard, we have an opinion page, which is on page 15, and an interesting question has been asked today, and of course this is a question that many Kenyans, I'm sure, during their tea breaks and their lunch breaks would want to debate and discuss. Is Interior CS Matiang'i ripe for presidency? So that's a question that has been asked there, and there are those who have said yes, and an example of Honorable Simba Arati says yes, it is time for him, and he is ripe to be president. We have Sylvanus Osoro, who has said no. So what's your thoughts? Do you think that CS Matiang'i is ripe for presidency? I don't know if, Bernard, you have a feeling towards that and what you think.
I feel people are misleading this gentleman. He might possess the qualities of a good leader, but in our political system and establishment, I don't think if Matiang'i will be competitive enough
to be a president.
be
But
a president.
if you say he has the right qualities for a leader,
Yeah,
and he has proved this time and again by being given responsibility over certain things, and he has done that, you know, with a lot of progress.
Yeah, you know, in politics there are so many things at play. As I told you from the beginning, our politics is a very unique political system because we don't really look at the qualities, we don't really look at the ability of somebody to deliver. What we look at is very minute things like, you know, your clan, where you come from, your region, who are you supporting, you know, things like that. And Matiang'i might be cheated by those who want to, you know, to
Make
get
him feel
some,
good.
to look good to him, that, oh, you'll be president. The way they lied to Olekiapi,
Or even somebody like Kathy Kilonzo. Remember, she had done so well, then she was...
Yeah, and she was found to be, you know, a senator in Makueni. Then we have had Pastor Pius Muiru, thought since he has a large following of Christians, he can be president. But Kenya is a very unique country, and it takes a lot.
It takes a lot.
It takes a lot.
So maybe he
so
cannot...
if somebody like in his backyard, if somebody like Simeon Nyachai, who was very powerful, he had resources, you know, he understood the system so well, he had served in the system for as many years as I can imagine, but could not even make it beyond the Kisii region. So I think Matiang'i should concentrate on professionalism, let him be professional, work,
and remain as a technocrat
work
that he is.
independent in the responsibility he has been given. Because at the moment when people start now pushing him, he has started like antagonizing himself with the appointing authority, feeling that he's now, you know, he's now the boss, he's now, he has the following, he has people, and such kind of things can really bring him down.
Do you think his qualities would make a president, away from the political aspect of it? Because I know what you're arguing. I understand your argument. And the argument is, when you look at the numbers, he may not garner the numbers because of the kind of political system that we have. But do you think his qualities would qualify one to be a president?
Yeah, Matiang'i looks somebody who is, you know, determined, somebody who is serious and who can deliver. And is the kind of leaders that Kenya wishes to have. But as I've said, Mike, it's very unfortunate
it's a different,
that we don't get such kind of individuals and people to lead us or to hold, you know,
such high office.
Senior high offices.
All right, and well, Dr. Matiang'i, in case you're watching, we don't know if you're going to throw your hat in for president.
But we wish him all the best. If he wishes to, let him, you know, but let people not lie to him.
Okay, let's now take a look at the Daily Nation before we wind up. And the headline, we've already looked at that. Killer school owner still walking free. If you'd like to see what that story is about, do get yourself a copy of the Daily Nation. A day after the tragedy, there's still nobody who has been arrested. But of course, there are questions surrounding the fact that what would they be charged with? Would it be negligence? Would it be murder or manslaughter? And that still remains. But of course, the investigative agencies still waiting for a report from the engineers and from the county government before they know who they can actually make responsible and hold to book in regards to that school that collapsed, Precious Talent School Academy, which collapsed on Monday, killing 7 students and pupils. Now, there's also page 5, Prado at the center of the probe in city murders. That's again the story that we've already referred to in the Standard, of where a mother who was 73 and her 47-year-old daughter were found murdered in a house in South B. And of course, questions lingering to what may have happened. But again, bringing to question some of the investigative agencies that we have and some of the operations that we have spent a lot of money as a country. For instance, CCTV cameras that are all over the place. Are they able to trace and track down a vehicle that is said to have been seen dropping them off at 2:30 a.m.? But let's look at a story on page 6. And this is Matters Politics. Kibra mini-poll threatens to tear NASA apart. And one might argue and ask, is NASA still together? I mean, when we talk about NASA being torn apart, is it even together in the first place?
NASA exists on papers, but practically does not exist. So it's something that is held together by the virtue that they entered an agreement, and the agreement or the MOU was filed by the registrar of political parties. But practically, NASA does not exist.
Does not exist.
And when I had Edwin Sifuna, the SG for ODM, saying that he has expressed, he has been given authority to withdraw ODM from NASA, then I felt that maybe Sifuna is not aware of what's the current status of NASA. And the things started falling apart when the former Prime Minister appeared on the steps of Arambe House. And he shook the hand.
That famous handshake.
Yeah, the famous handshake, without informing the rest of his partners. And when now this guy, Edwin Sifuna, says that ODM will be fielding candidates, including in Bungoma, where one of the NASA principals hailed from, I think he misses the point, because even in the last election, ODM had a candidate in Bungoma as a senatorial candidate. There was a guy called Boniface. And nothing, nothing withheld this guy from participating in the political activities. So it's very mean on the part of the ODM to feel that where they are strong, then no other political party should field a candidate from there. And they are not only talking about NASA. They have also blamed Jubilee that they have betrayed the handshake.
The handshake.
That they want. So we wonder, how was ODM expecting to participate in a political contest alone? Because if you remove all the NASA affiliates candidates, then you remove Jubilee, we remain with only ODM candidates.
Absolutely.
So if ODM wanted to go unopposed in this mini poll, then it would have conversed with the other players, said, this seat just leave for us. Without having them come in, then you start. Of course, they are exercising their democratic right. Then start blaming that they did wrong to field candidates.
But this also brings into focus our formation of political parties, because since they are hardly philosophy and ideology driven, then you find such what we'd call petty squabbles. Because if they were ideology driven, then of course then even their fielding the candidates would be unanimous in terms of who they field. But because they are personality driven, then it becomes, if Uhuru and Raila shake hands, then because those two personalities have come together, then Jubilee should not field a candidate, according to them.
In fact, there are some who are insinuating that Jubilee does not, or the handshake, the Uhuru does not have a candidate in Kibra, which is a very wrong perception, because Jubilee is headed by President Uhuru Kenyatta, is the party leader, and we have seen him unveil the candidate. So how do you go around again saying that you don't recognize that, yet you are in the same party saying that you are going to support another opponent who is in a different party because you feel that's the candidate for the president. So it's very unfortunate that our democracy has not really matured to a level where we talk about what you have said about the issue of ideology, and having philosophy that guide the political formation. Another issue is about the creation of these partnerships and coalition of parties. We have seen the formation of parties, all coalitions since 1992. When we moved back, then there was this NAC in 2002. Then every electoral year we have a formation of a coalition, but it only ends after that electoral cycle.
Absolutely.
So we thought, like the way Jubilee was trying to make things, to bring all these parties together, then collapse them to form a big, movement of a political party. But it was also a good experiment, but it's not also working.
It's not also
so
working.
We are seeing so many squabbles in Jubilee, and at the end of the day, if Jubilee stands the test, well and good. But I'm seeing another formation coming up as we move towards 2022.
Well, let's wait and see, but that's something that we are used to in Kenya. Just before we wind up with page 14 of The Nation, but before that, just lest we forget, there is currently ongoing the United Nations General Assembly in the United States. Uhuru urging world leaders to respond fast to climate change. Climate change is a big topic right there, and that's what's happening in the US. Do get yourself a copy of The Nation, and on page 10, Uhuru urging world leaders to respond fast to climate change. But let's finish off with page 14 of the Daily Nation, which is the cartoon segment, which I think for us is a reminder as Kenyans of our leaders, because that's a question that we must continue to debate on. If we can please have page 14 of the Daily Nation, but also just to highlight that particular story on page 10 of the United Nations General Assembly, which is taking place in New York right now as we speak, where President Uhuru Kenyatta has urged world leaders to continue with the country playing a big role in mitigating the effects of global warming. And well, there is page 14, the cartoon, and those are your celebrity leaders right there who appear when disasters take place. And well, that I will leave for you to basically just deduce what that means and whether those are the kind of leaders that we want for today and tomorrow. That's where we wind up the newspaper review right here on Morning Express. But get yourself a copy of the Standard. Remember that you can get yourself a copy of the digital Standard, which is found on Google Play Store, and all you need to do is download the app, and you're able to read your newspaper on your phone or whatever digital device that you have. For now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, it's time for the newsroom, and we'll be looking at disaster